Well, hello everyone, Prynawn da chi gyd, and welcome to this presentation about Gwendolyn and Margaret Davies. I'm Rhian Davies, and since 2007, I've been Artistic Director of the Grigunog Festival, Wales's oldest extant classical music festival, which the sisters founded at their home, Grigunog Hall, near Newtown, in 1933. I should have spoken at the National Library of Wales earlier in the summer to mark 100 years since the Mrs. Davies purchased the hall outright on the 31st of July, 1920. But alas, that talk, and indeed the whole of Grigunog Festival's centenary season in the end, had to be cancelled because of the coronavirus pandemic. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to mark the centenary instead. And much of the material that I'll be showing on screen is drawn from the National Library collections that have assisted my research since I began programming the festival. I'm also using a few images from private collections, from the festival archive, and from my own. So thank you to everyone for their kind permissions, and I hope you'll enjoy looking at them with me. So the briefest of backgrounds to begin. Gwendolyn Davies was born in 1882, and her sister Margaret, or Daisy, as she was usually known, in 1884. Granddaughters of David Davies Llandinam, the remarkable self-made millionaire whose business interests included the Ocean Coal Company and the Barry Docks, the sisters applied their inherited wealth to what Thomas Jones, one of their principal advisors, described as unostentatious philanthropy, and which Gwendolyn wrote to TJ in her turn, was motivated by a sense of communicating loveliness to others. They grew up at Plastinum and began purchasing their fabled collection of paintings and sculpture in 1908, when they were still living in the family home. They bought separately, pursuing individual interests, and eventually bequeathed around 260 artworks to the National Museum of Wales, transforming the Cardiff collection with iconic Impressionist images such as Renoir's La Parisienne, 3 water lily canvases by Monet, and several of his views of Venice. In this photograph of a festival concert by the harpist Rhodri Davies that was held in the Grigunog Gallery of the National Museum in 2012, you can see the Renoir on the back wall, with Rodin's sculpture The Kiss in the foreground. Gwendolyn and Margaret had acquired the Grigunog estate with their brother David, the first Baron Davies, in October 1913. After renting the hall until 1919 to a Mr. and Mrs. Quintin Dick, breeders of Labradors that won Best in Show 3 times at Crufts, the contents were auctioned off on site over several days in May 1920, and the sisters bought out David's interest in July. Sir Edwin Hall and his son Stanley, the architects responsible for the Liberty Store in London's West End, were appointed to remodel the property, and the initial vision was to establish Grigunog as a museum and craft centre. Robert Ashwin Maynard, a scenic painter for the London Theatre, who had studied with Walter Sickert amongst others prior to active service in the First World War, was also brought in as a consultant in 1921. It was a rather grandiose enterprise, he recalled 30 years later, to establish in the heart of Montgomeryshire quite a small colony of artist craftsmen who, relieved of the necessity of facing everyday practical affairs, would relax in the beautiful countryside and devote their undivided attention to the design and production of fine pottery, would weave, would make simple furniture, and print fine editions. All this would be made possible through the goodwill and understanding of the girls. Maynard often referred to Gwendolyn and Margaret as the girls, though correspondence with Thomas Jones suggests that the latter ticked him off about it. Sorry about the girls. We most of us referred to them as such, with Blaker from the word go. The sisters is perhaps better, but not half so right. Maynard was a friend of Hugh Blaker, the sisters' artistic advisor, whom he mentions here, and they had already admired two of his paintings when they were selected for a Goupil Gallery exhibition in 1914. But it was a chance meeting with Miss Daisy on the platform of Machynlleth Station between trains, sometime after the war, when Maynard was getting back on his feet by working with his father as a traveling salesman for cattle medicines out of Shrewsbury, that cemented the connection. The whole thing sounds fantastical, doesn't it? But Maynard describes the sequence of events in his recollections of the press that were among the last papers I called up in the National Library reading room before the lockdown in mid-March. And by 1922, he found himself the first controller of the Grigornog Press, with a cottage, a car, an annual salary of £400, and a brief to begin producing limited edition books of rare quality. The girls were very different from what I had expected, he continues. To my surprise, there was no side, no parade of wealth. In fact, nothing to suggest that they were aware that they owned the whole bag of tricks. They were just simple and unaffected. I liked them for it, and quickly sensed the immense possibilities of the plans they were making. Also, for the first time, was this insistence on the Welsh character of the undertaking brought to my notice and understanding. The Grigornog Press was unique in that everything was created under a single roof. Indeed, Maynard believed it was the first time that any private press had embraced all the arts necessary to produce a complete book in-house. Printing, naturally, including the casting of type, the design and cutting of all the initial letters, decorations, and woodcuts, the making of marbled paper, and the design and execution of the bindings. The coach house and stables in the courtyard at Grigornog were converted to accommodate a Victoria Platen machine press manufactured in Germany and an Albion hand press from Sheffield, plus workshops for the growing team of compositors and binders. The 26 pages of the first book, Poems by George Herbert, took 5 months to prepare between July and November 1923. And a coronet of trees conspicuous at that time on a summit of a hill near Grigornog was adopted as a press mark. The design could vary from job to job, often interlaced with 2 capital Gs for Gwasg Grigornog. Maynard would leave Grigornog in the autumn of 1930 to found a business of his own, the Raven Press, but the Grigornog Press continued into the 1940s, publishing 42 titles, 7 of them in Welsh, and printing some 12,000 books in total. Another function of the press was to produce ephemera, programs and posters for the concerts and conferences that were organized at Grigornog by the sisters. The billiard room that they'd inherited on site was of little use or interest to them, of course, but they saw the potential for conversion into a music room, and the transformation included a raised platform, hessian on the walls to improve the acoustic, and an organ custom built by the famous firm of Frederick Rothwell. Performers and audience members alike still love the wonderfully intimate experience of making and hearing music in a space that seats fewer than 200 people. And this photo shows the stage set for a concert during our Irish season in 2016. The arts came together in the music room. The early festivals combined music and poetry with the paintings hung by Maynard in 1924 to be contemplated as an integral part of the aesthetic experience and glimpses of the gardens beyond. The fusion was particularly intense during the non-denominational Sunday morning services when the Grigornog Choir sang concealed behind a screen on which El Greco's The Disrobing of Christ was hung. A remarkable and highly charged emotional experience, as we learned when the chamber choir Tenebrae, directed by Nigel Short, recreated a service for us as part of the 75th anniversary festival in 2008. Well, a great deal has been written about Grigornog, the sisters, their art and their press. But since I began programming the festival, I've come to understand just how much more there is still to learn about their musical interests and patronage. There are the lost narratives of their personal practice, for instance. Margaret studied the harp with Gwendolyn Mason and took singing lessons, while Gwendolyn enjoyed playing the Rothwell organ in the music room and owned 2 fine violins, one of them a Stradivarius, known as the Park. She was clearly capable of giving a public performance of the César Franck violin sonata, no mean feat, at a recital organised by the Aberystwyth University Musical Club in February 1911. The sisters also spent summer holidays in Bayreuth and purchased scores of the Wagner operas that made an indelible impression upon them through attending performances at the Festspielhaus. Gwendolyn and Margaret were especially keen to raise awareness of chamber music in Wales through making concerts and tuition more widely available. And in July 1914, Gwendolyn pledged £75,000 to fund a department of instrumental music in Aberystwyth, headed by the Gaston Lefebvre Quartet from Paris. This appears to have been the first conservatoire of music in Wales, 35 years before today's Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama came into being in Cardiff in 1949. And the quartet was appointed over the head of Aberystwyth's then Professor of Music, the composer David Jenkins, who fired off a letter to the Musical Times to complain. It certainly was a bold initiative, but the timing was unfortunate because the school had barely opened when war was declared and the players were called home to France on active service. Curiously though, the war displaced another group of continental musicians to replace them almost immediately. The story of the Belgian artists whom the sisters helped bring to safety in mid-Wales in October 1914 is comparatively well known, and several beautiful artworks by Valerius de Sadlier and Georges Minne can still be seen at Grigornog. But a group of distinguished Belgian musicians also fled the war, and it was a real privilege to reconstruct their story through sources in Brussels and Antwerp to shape the festival curation in 2014, and to collaborate with the Flemish Radio Choir, the BBC National Orchestra of Wales and others to revive their music. These refugee composers, opera singers and instrumentalists formed an impromptu concert party that gave more than 60 fundraising performances all over Wales, including this one at the Coliseum Theatre on Terrace Road in Aberystwyth, now Amgueddfa Ceredigion Museum, on the 16th of October 1914. Again, this lost narrative casts fresh light on the musical interests of the sisters, as well as their philanthropy, internationalism, and humanitarianism. During the latter part of the war, Gwendolyn and Margaret Davies volunteered to work at the Cantine des Dames Anglaises in Troyes. Here they met the folk singer Dora Herbert-Jones, who came to play a key role in music making at Grigornog following her appointment as secretary to the press in 1927. Miss Gwen's letters from France to J.H. Davis, Aberystwyth University's registrar and later principal, show that she continued to ponder the possibilities for professionalising music in Wales too. These poor stranded Belgians, she wrote in 1917. We hope to be able to utilise them in some way or another. We thought we would like the more interesting people at Aberystwyth and that some of the musicians would be helpful in starting the projected orchestra along the coast. And again, I am becoming more and more convinced that the best way of tackling the problem of musical education in rural Wales is by forming tutorial classes in centres. And as soon as this terrible war is over, I hope we shall be able to find some really practical and workable scheme. These and other radical ideas would come quickly to fruition following the arrival in West Wales of the whirlwind that was Henry Walford Davies. Composer, organist, conductor, and irrepressible communicator about music through the new and evolving media of the gramophone and radio, Walford Davies was born in Oswestry in 1869. He was a prolific composer, and Solemn Melody and the RAF March Past are perhaps his best known scores today, the latter written during the First World War when he was head of music for the Royal Air Force with the rank of Major. Following the death of David Jenkins in 1915, some felt that David Vaughan Thomas, father of the broadcaster Winford Vaughan Thomas, should succeed him as Aberystwyth's professor. But the Davises and Thomas Jones were determined to advance their own candidate. Walford made a flying visit to Aberystwyth to see how it felt to be there in April 1918, and his appointment as founder director of the National Council of Music for Wales was ratified by the Court of the University of Wales in November. By the 1st of April 1919, he was also installed as Aberystwyth's first Grigynnog Professor of Music in a new school of music, the Music House, at No. 2 Marine Terrace. A contemporary invoice refers to the immediate acquisition of 4 baby grand pianos and 4 uprights at a cost of £854. And this handsome photograph shows Walford Davis seated in the centre of the front row with other staff members and students of ABBA's music department in July 1926. Many of Walford's visionary schemes for Welsh music were bankrolled by what a National Council report described after his sudden death in 1941 as the boundless generosity shown by the Mrs. Davis of Grigynnog. In 1919, for example, following on from the false start with the Gaston Lefebvre Quartet, Aberystwyth became the first university music department anywhere in the world to employ a resident ensemble, a piano trio. Trios were also appointed to Bangor and Cardiff in 1921, and these professional players gave weekly local recitals plus additional concerts across Wales as part of the extramural work of the university, what we might now call community outreach in rural areas, with the individual players giving instrumental tuition to adults and young people in association. The aim, as David Alsobrook sets out in his excellent book, Music for Wales, was to establish the University of Wales as the centre of the musical life of the people, to reform education and access to music, and to further the study and practice of music, including the expression of Welsh nationality in music. Instruments, scores, and parts were made available to borrow free of charge, and classes in music theory and appreciation were established, plus listening clubs equipped with gramophones and records. Well, I hope I've given you enough time to study on screen the programme of the Aberystwyth Piano Trio's most famous recital in the Parish Hall, now Theatr Castell, on the 16th of March 1922, which marked the United Kingdom debut of Bela Bartok. Bartok played several of his own works, including the Allegro Barbaro and Bear Dance, and the Cambrian News and Welsh Farmers Gazette, as it was grandly known in those days, reported on an epoch-making visit. Monsieur Bartok is the leader of the new Hungarian School of Music and a pianist and composer of continental fame. His performance on Thursday was a masterpiece of technique which gripped the attention of the vast audience. Faintly reminiscent of Liszt, the music was stamped with a rugged originality. It made the strongest appeal to the intellect, and though its meaning and message was somewhat obscured to the uninitiated, it gave a glimpse of hitherto undreamt of possibilities. Walford Davis was rather more succinct in his description of the performance as baffling. Another of Walford's innovations was to found an annual festival of choral and orchestral music at Aberystwyth in 1919. Members of the London Symphony and Halle orchestras played for him initially, but by 1922, a university orchestra had grown into a Welsh symphony orchestra. Again, this predated today's BBC National Orchestra of Wales by 6 years, and championed Welsh music, including a whole programme of orchestral scores by contemporary Welsh composers in November 1923. Aberystwyth soon became a prototype for similar festivals across Wales, including the Three Valleys Festivals at Mountain Ash and the Montgomery County Music Festival in Newtown that celebrates its centenary next year. Some of you may remember the pavilion on the outskirts of Newtown, where these massed performances used to take place, a former aircraft hangar that was acquired from Lincolnshire thanks to a loan of £2,000 from the Grigornog sisters. Walford also directed an all-Wales choir of 4,000 voices that brought Welsh Week at the British Empire exhibition in Wembley Stadium to a rousing close in 1924. And here's the beautiful poster, perhaps my favourite piece of work produced by Robert Ashwin Maynard at the Grigornog Press. It wasn't just the Davis sisters who were captivated by Walford. His industry and charisma also dazzled Winifred Cwm Tennant, another leading Welsh patroness of the period, who wrote about him in 1921. He is pure Cinquecento Florentine, lifted out of the Renaissance for our deliverance. Before him shrivel all the ugly things of Wales, the bad architecture expressed in 1,000 chapels, the poor art revealed in the average picture sent in for Eisteddfod competitions, the commercialized, joyless furniture of its million homes, the dreadful so-called music of the children's operetta. All these things fly from before the face of Walford Davis, and he creates for us a new Wales. The humblest bush touched by him glows with the fire of God. Here is genius making its habitation among us. Through Walford Davis's personal connections and the patronage of Gwendolyn and Margaret Davis, leading composers such as Edward Elgar, Ralph Vaughan Williams, and Gustav Holst were invited to direct performances of their scores at the National Council of Music's festivals in Wales. All three were also invited to Grigornog, and on screen you can see Elgar's entry in the visitor's book on the 27th of June, 1924. The date and the autograph, of course, are in Elgar's hand, while the rest of the inscription, including the musical quotations, was written out by Walford Davis and gives context to the visit. After the Apostles sung at Harlech, that is the Harlech Castle Musical Festival, where Elgar conducted his own score, we motored to Grigornog, arriving late, tired, happy. The next morning, Elgar motored to Worcester with Harrington, the Grigornog chauffeur, HWD as far as Llangurig. And here too are the signatures of those who attended the first Grigornog Festival in June 1933. This is such a rich and evocative document that we could almost give over the whole talk to working through it. So I'll just highlight a few of the names. In the first column, about halfway down, I hope you can see Gustav Holst and his daughter Imogen Holst, also a musician, who went on to work closely with Benjamin Britten at the Aldborough Festival. In the second column, Margaret Davis herself near the top, Walford Davis, again about halfway down, and Adrian Bolt right at the very bottom. And then in the third column are some of the Aberystwyth contingent who played at each festival, including the organist Charles Clements and the cellist Arthur Williams. Artists and audience members alike all attended as guests of the sisters, and everyone stayed at the hall, creating a special house party atmosphere. Gwendolyn also had quite a keen eye for PR, arranging that events should take place in June, as they still do, when the Grigornog rhododendrons are in full bloom, for press photographers to document, as well as for visitors to enjoy, especially during a concert interval. The Hungarian violinist Jeli Daranyi was the star soloist at the first festival, and other guests during the 1930s included Leila McGann, Arwell Hughes, George Bernard Shaw, and Joyce Grenfell. Each season was a showcase for the Grigornog Choir, in which Gwendolyn and Margaret sang alongside their estate employees, gardeners, maids, members of the press staff, and a few local school teachers to stiffen the ranks. Walford Davis and Adrian Bolt shared the conducting, and the accompanist was Charles Clemens. Holst and Vaughan Williams arranged Welsh folk songs for the choir to perform, several of them taken down from the singing of Dora Herbert-Jones. And Holst also dedicated his last choral work, O Spiritual Pilgrim, for Grigynnog. He was due to conduct the premiere during the second festival in 1934, but sadly died a month before. But this is the beautiful autograph manuscript, which is held. After Walford Davis succeeded Elgar as Master of the King's Music, also in 1934, the Grigynnog Choir formed part of a Montgomeryshire delegation that sang in 2 Royal Command concerts at the Albert Hall in 1935 and 38. The choir also took part in several BBC broadcasts, notably a live relay of Bach's St. Matthew Passion from the music room in 1939, which must have been quite a technological feat at the time. But the Second World War meant that the first sequence of festivals came to an abrupt halt after the 6th in 1938. Walford Davis died suddenly in 1941 and Gwendolen 10 years later, so it was 1954 before occasional concerts were held at the hall again, and 1956 before the second series of festivals began, all organised by Ian Parrott after his appointment as Grigynnog Professor of Music at Aberystwyth in 1950. Many people consider Gwendolen to have been the dominant sister, but Margaret's correspondence with Prof, my own professor here in Aberystwyth, shows that she was not shy of suggesting music that he should programme, such as Bach and Kodály. Other repertoire heard during the 1950s festivals spanned Monteverdi to Stravinsky. And it was Aberystwyth students who sustained most of the music making during what was a golden age for the department, when many who went on to become leading names in Welsh music were gathered together. So included in this photograph, for instance, are the composers William Mathias and David Harris, Heward Rees, first director of the Welsh Music Information Centre, now Tŷ Cerdd, John Cynnan-Jones, conductor of the Treorchy Male Choir, and my mother Jane Davis, then Jane Filer, conductor of the Havrin Ladies Choir. 3 early Mathias scores also received their world premiere performances in the music room at Grigynnog, including Suite Parisienne for piano duet, which Will played with another ABBA contemporary, D. Hugh Jones, for many years the fine accompanist of the Pontadillais Male Choir. Occasional concerts continued to take place after Grigynnog passed in trust to the University of Wales on the death of Margaret Davis in 1963. From 1969, annual arts fellowships were also awarded to artists, writers and musicians, including Ossian Ellis, seen here in the portrait by David Griffiths. Glentegau Hughes, the first warden of Grigynnog, described the scheme. What was the fellow to do during his stay? We decided that he was not to have formal lecturing duties, and no doubt this was what prompted the Times diary above its column describing the first fellow's idyllic prospects in our cottage to place the pithy heading, Cottage Loaf. Rather, he was expected to carry on with his own work in a new context, and he would meet students and others as they came to Grigynnog, and to present his work to groups of them in whatever way was most appropriate for him and for them. A tour of the studio, a recital, a reading of poetry. The distinguished harpist Ossian Ellis enchanted many visiting groups with recitals both of harp music and of Welsh folk songs. He spent much time in the small library, researching into the history of Welsh music, using evidence from early Welsh literature. Well, the book that resulted from this research was Hanes y Delyn yn Nghymru, The Story of the Harp in Wales. And as a thank you for that opportunity, Ossian Ellis led several musical events at the hall, including Ysgol y Delyn, a day school for local young harpists on the 8th of September 1971. Ossian's teaching was documented by the photographer Jeff Charles in a series of 54 images that are now held in the National Library as part of his extensive collection. And here's the catalogue entry that allows you to scroll through those negatives. I've highlighted one in the center of the screen that gives a performer's eye view of the music room as you look out toward the audience from the platform. The other great event of Ossian Ellis's tenure as a Grigornog Arts Fellow was a one-off weekend festival in May 1972 that included a recital shared with the tenor Peter Pears and Benjamin Britten at the piano. That evening is my own first clear memory of going to Grigornog. It was just about a month after my 11th birthday, and I still have the autographs that the artists gave to me, never imagining, of course, that one day I would grow up to program this winter. The Grigornog Press was revived as Gwasg Grigornog in 1978 and has operated from the same premises in the courtyard ever since. And 10 years later, in 1988, the tenor Anthony Rolfe Johnson relaunched the Grigornog Festival as a charitable company, inviting colleagues to perform with him, such as Benjamin Luxon, John Mark Ainsley, and the young Bryn Terfel, when he was still a student at Guildhall. Diane Forlano and Barbara Pearson, two of the finest vocal coaches in the world, also led masterclasses for international singing students that were hugely popular. Since succeeding Tony, I've drawn on the heritage of the hall and my work as a music historian to devise our programming, and the concerts, talks, and exhibitions for each festival are curated on a central theme. The 75th anniversary season in 2008, for example, revived compositions associated with the Grigornog Choir, while Venezia was inspired by Monet's paintings of Venice that were purchased by Gwendolyn and Margaret Davies from 1912. Like the sisters, we continue to collaborate with Wales's leading performers, including Catherine Finch and Llyr Williams, and we've commissioned scores from contemporary Welsh composers such as Hilary Tan and Hugh Watkins. We also revive music by Welsh composers of the past, including John Roberts, Tylanor Cymru, and Alec Templeton, the jazz pianist who made a major career in America and has his own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Inspired by a harpsichord festival at Grigornog during the 1930s, I've introduced a strand of early music programming that is very well suited to acoustic. And some of the world's leading Baroque specialists have performed for us there, including Nicola Petri, Johannes Svahani, Academia Byzantina, and Jordi Savall, taking his curtain call here with his ensemble Hesperian 21. We've arranged some of our concerts in spaces more appropriate to the repertoire, including Chirk Castle Chapel, Harlech Castle, and the National Library of Wales itself, where it's been great to bring back to life some of the music manuscripts that are held in the stacks. And we've been honoured to represent the work of the Welsh festival sector overseas, including showcases at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival in Washington and Wales Week USA in New York. To present each season, Grigornog Festival is extremely grateful for the ongoing support of the Davies Charities and other partners, which brings the story full circle. Well, in drawing to a close, I'd like to thank the National Library of Wales very much again for inviting me to give this presentation today. Thank you too for joining me, and I hope you've enjoyed seeing some of the treasures from library collections relevant to Gwendolyn and Margaret Davies and the music making that they fostered at Grigornog and elsewhere. Next summer, we hope to reschedule an exhibition that was planned for Oriel Brondanu as part of this year's centenary celebrations, based on the work of Robert Ashwin Maynard, and especially the musical ephemera that he produced as first controller of the Grigornog Press from 1922 to 1930. And I look forward to the day when we may also have the pleasure of meeting again in the library and at the hall, it really has been a most peculiar summer without any music in the music room. For now, I'll conclude by reading an extract from an essay by A.K. Holland that was written for the Liverpool Daily Post in 1936. Gwendolen and Margaret Davies were clearly delighted with it, for they had it typeset and printed by their press. And small wonder, for it gives a real sense of how it must have felt to be present at that first sequence of 6 festivals during the 1930s. A visit to Grigornog is something in the nature of a pilgrimage. Here, amid the quiet hills of Montgomeryshire, in surroundings of singular charm and peacefulness, where nature and art vie with each other for the crown of repose, is enshrined annually a festival of poetry and music. The beautiful estate, the house with its treasures of classical and modern painting, everything in the atmosphere of the place contributes to that rare experience, art for love's sake. To speak of the many gracious and happy touches with which the festival is blessed, its intimacy, its charm of atmosphere, and the sense of community with which the distinguished artists who take part in it manage to infuse their labor of love, would take much time and space. Suffice that Grigornog possesses a character all its own and provides an example that one could wish to see followed elsewhere. Thank you very much. And if you'll excuse me for just one moment then, I will see if any comments or questions have come in through, oh indeed, I can see there are some icons on Q&A and on chat, so bear with me while I just read. It's the same question actually. Can the Park violin be seen or is it in use today? I looked into this quite recently actually. There's an online website that charts where all the Stradivarius that are known to us are. And it's gone back into private hands. And I don't know very much more than that. Surprisingly, there is no paperwork anywhere at all concerning the sale that has come to light anyway at the moment. But sadly, Miss Gwen had to give up playing. She had a rare blood condition that eventually affected her fingers. And so she had to part with both violins in the end. The other one was a Guarnerius, as I believe. But I'm sorry I can't give a more conclusive answer than that. For future news, you may also like to follow the library and the festival on social media. And meantime, thank you again and goodbye for now. Diolch yn fawr a chymerwch ofal.